Hey guys, tonight we're headed to the chill green edges of early medieval Ireland, where silence carries more than weight, it carries purpose. The air is thick with fog, barley smoke, and the quiet scurry of bare feet across stone. You're cloistered in a monastic compound carved out of wind-blown turf and damp gray stone nestled against a hillside that rolls gently toward the edge of the known world. And tonight, you're going to eat, but you're not going to talk. You're not even going to chew too loud. You're about to step into the deeply quiet, humbly ritualistic, occasionally questionable world of what Irish monks ate in silence. You probably won't survive this. Not because of hunger, not exactly, but because everything you eat is either boiled until it gives up salted until it can't argue, or served cold because you're not allowed to start a fire without permission from someone whose only hobby is strictness. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to gray stone and colder air. It's early, too early. The kind of hour where even the roosters hesitate. You're bundled in a rough woolen robe that smells faintly of smoke sheep and last week's tea. The bell just rang low, solemn, and unhurried, echoing through the thick air like a command only the wind dares to question. You rise. You don't speak. No one does. Not out of shyness, but by rule. Silence until after the first prayer. And even then, you better have something important to say, like fire flood, or someone stealing the abbot's honey. You make your way barefoot across the uneven floor of your stone cell, avoiding the cold spots near the outer wall where the frost likes to linger. Outside your door, monks are already moving in the same direction down the long hall, through the arched cloister and toward the small refectory tucked near the edge of the herb garden. The refectory is dim, lit only by 2 oil lamps and a smudge of sunrise bleeding through the slits in the wall. A fire smolders low in the hearth, more ceremonial than helpful. You find your place, marked not by name, but by habit. You always sit third from the end on the northern bench next to Brother Finan, who breathes very slowly when he's hungry. On the table before you sits a thin linen cloth, a wooden bowl, and a chunk of bread, dense, dark, slightly damp from the night air. A spoon rests beside it, carved from you and worn smooth by years of faithful porridge. There's a mug, too, earthenware, chipped on one side. It's still warm. You peek inside. Stewed oats. Again, thick, pale, unseasoned, and exactly the way you remember from yesterday. A small pat of butter sits near the rim, already melting in. You don't complain. You wouldn't dare. This is breakfast, and breakfast is a gift. Historians know quite a bit about monastic diet, from surviving rulebooks, agricultural records, and even poetry. Most monasteries in early medieval Ireland followed a modified version of the Rule of Saint Benedict, emphasizing simplicity, modesty, and the complete absence of second helpings. You lift your spoon just as the reading begins. One monk stands at the front next to the hearth and begins reciting from a Latin psalter. His voice is steady, soft, and strangely soothing. You can't understand every word, but it doesn't matter. It's the rhythm that counts. Spoon. Chew. Pause. Listen. It's like praying with your mouth full. You glance around. No one looks up. Eyes are lowered, focused on bowls. A few raise eyebrows in subtle complaint at particularly chewy bites, but that's the extent of drama. Even chewing has a rhythm here. You stir your oats slowly. They're thick, lumpy, and faintly sweet, probably from dried apples soaked overnight. Sometimes it's raisins. Sometimes it's just oaty. Today you're lucky. You break the bread with your fingers, careful not to drop crumbs. Not because of neatness, but because crumbs invite crows, and no one wants to relive the incident from last summer. You chew the crust slowly, letting it soften with each bite. The monk next to you coughs once and then stiffens. You both know the rule, no unnecessary sound. You nod once in sympathy. He nods back. That's the whole conversation. Outside the refectory, the monastery is slowly warming with the day. Smoke curls from the bakery. The sheep are bleating. The bells have rung once more. You finish the last of your oats, scoop out the dregs with your bread, and sip from your mug a watery herbal tea made from dried nettle and sage. It tastes like boiled field, but it's hot, and you're grateful. You sit for a moment longer, spoon resting in your palm, listening to the last lines of the psalm. Then, as quietly as you arrived, you rise. You carry your bowl to the side table, rinse it quickly in a bucket of warm water, and return it to the shelf. Still no words. Still no noise. But your belly is warm now, full in that humble way. Enough fuel for prayer's chores and an afternoon spent peeling root vegetables while pretending not to smell the kitchen broth pot. You walk back out into the cloister. The wind has picked up. The sky is still a heavy gray, but you hear the faint call of seabirds from the west. Somewhere out there is the wide Atlantic. But for now, your world is stone, wood bread, and silence. And honestly, it's not so bad. The wind hasn't yet warmed when you step back into the cloister. You tug your wool robe tighter around your shoulders and follow the slow shuffle of feet through the gravel path that loops behind the chapel. The dew from the grass seeps between your toes, and a lazy crow watches from the rooftop, tilting its head as if it's silently judging your posture. You're heading toward the refectory again, but not to eat this time to listen. The second meal won't be for hours. Until then, you'll work, pray, copy, or clean. But first, the reader continues, voice echoing soft and measured under the arch of stone. Your stomach rumbles again. You're not alone. All around you are monks in various stages of silent hunger, some with hands folded patiently, others with arms crossed like human knots. There's no shame in it. Hunger is expected. In fact, the rule of St. Benedict suggests that monks should not indulge in full satisfaction, but only eat what is necessary. What's necessary, it turns out, is just enough to keep you upright. You begin to reflect quietly, of course, on how these meals work, the rules, the exceptions, the ancient logic of how something so seemingly basic could become a structure unto itself. Some days you fast, some days you feast, most days you wait. And the real challenge isn't the food, it's knowing which day it is. Because in the monastic calendar, the weeks don't look like yours. The days are punctuated not by Friday pizza or Saturday pancakes, but by saints' feast days, fast days, vigils, abstinence, and yes, partial abstinence, which somehow still includes onions. Historians still argue whether Irish monks were stricter than their continental brothers, especially when it came to fasting. Some sources suggest that Irish monks fasted more frequently and severely, often substituting water for ale and salt for everything else. Others argue they were simply more inventive in bending the rules. Take cheese, for example. Is cheese allowed on a fast day? Depends who you ask. Some say yes because it's not meat and it doesn't bleed. Others say no because it's made from milk, and milk is an animal product, and animals have souls. Probably. Maybe. Either way, best not to ask the abbot when he's mid-prayer and hasn't eaten since yesterday. You've learned this the hard way. In fact, today may or may not be a semi-fast day, which means you'll eat 2 small meals, but only one can contain anything resembling excitement, like butter or lentils. Which meal will contain the excitement? That's up to the kitchen monk, who is known only as Brother Cormac, and whose mood seems to fluctuate based on cloud cover moon phase and possibly garlic. You sigh. Still no talking, but at least the sun is peeking through now, laying slanted gold across the worn flagstones. You move into the scriptoria chamber for morning work. Your job is copying the tail end of a sermon onto a fresh piece of vellum slowly, carefully, one stroke at a time. No crumbs allowed, no ink splotches, and absolutely no yawning. Midway through a particularly tedious amen, your mind wanders to lunch. You wonder what they'll serve. You hope it's root stew, thick and salty. You fear it's split oat mash, gray and joyless. You picture the options in your head like a monkish menu. Pottage with cabbage, broth with barley, 1 boiled turnip shared between 3. It's possible. You glance at the monk next to you. His lips are moving slightly, not praying, not whispering, just chewing air. It's his own private rebellion. You admire it. By midday, the bell rings again, clear now, echoing over the stone walls like a signal from heaven that you are in fact allowed to chew once more. You file toward the refectory back down the same gravel path past the crow, who is still watching you. The table is already set. Same bowl, same spoon, different bread. Today it's barley coarser than yesterday's, with a crust so thick you could chip a tooth on it. You smile. Tooth-chipping bread is a good sign. It means flour is plentiful, or someone got creative with the ashes in the oven. In your bowl, something steaming. That's the good news. The bad news, it's more oats. Oats flavored this time with leek and nettle. Someone's been in the herb garden. You give silent thanks to whichever brother decided a little green wouldn't kill us. You stir slowly, taking in the room. The monk reader is already halfway through a psalm about repentance, or patience, or possibly goats. You missed the opening lines. Across the table, Brother Finan is breathing slowly again. You take a bite. Hot, soft, just enough salt. The leeks are bright and sharp, a welcome change from yesterday's boiled mush. You chew slowly, careful not to slurp. You've learned the trick. Press the oats to the roof of your mouth, then swallow. Clean. Silent. The bread crumbles as you tear it, crumbs dusting the table. You brush them toward your lap because, again, the crows. One monk raises a finger, an ancient sign meaning pass the butter. Another responds with a barely perceptible nod, slides the dish forward without a word. It's a smooth system, almost elegant in its constraint. There is a rhythm to silence that only the hungry can understand. As the meal ends, the reader speaks the final words. You bow your head. One last spoonful. One last crumb. You stand. You clean. And just before leaving, you spot a pot of lentils still warm tucked into the coals. Someone's planning ahead. You slip back out into the midday light, your belly not full exactly, but not empty either. A kind of spiritual neutrality settles over your limbs, the warm kind that makes you neither eager to run nor eager to sleep. Just steady. That's how you feel here most days. Steady like the chapel stones that haven't moved in 300 years and don't intend to start now. The sun has cut through the clouds, by now lighting up the garden plots beside the outer cloister. Rows of kale, onions, leeks, and a small, somewhat optimistic patch of lentils shimmer with dew. A monk moves slowly between the rows, gently brushing soil away from the roots of a beet. You nod to him. He doesn't nod back. Not out of rudeness, it's just not that kind of day. You've been assigned to grain duty this afternoon, specifically porridge grinding. You trudge to the side of the abbey where a wide circular stone rests in a low wooden frame, a hand mill, at its side a burlap sack of dried oats and an empty bowl. You know the drill. You pour a scoop of grain into the hollow of the top stone, grab the wooden handle, and begin to turn, and turn, and turn. It takes a rhythm, a slow, breath-matched loop that hums quietly under your breath, even though you don't dare make a sound. A monk passes by with a jug of watered ale and gives you a thumbs up. You feel blessed. Historians agree that oats were a primary staple of the Irish monastic diet, easy to grow, easy to store, and easy to digest. Some even suggest the monks consume more oats per capita than any other European religious order, which is a polite way of saying that they were chronically regular. Your arms begin to ache by the third bowl. You pause to stretch, shake them out, and notice a younger monk nearby trying to balance a spoon on his nose while no one's watching. He drops it when he sees you staring. You both pretend nothing happened. It's a slow hour, nothing dramatic, just stone grain and grind. But the smell, that warm, slightly sweet scent of cracked oats, starts to sink into your clothes, into your hair, into the day. It's oddly comforting, like the world could fall apart and you'd still be able to make porridge. That's monastic resilience for you. A soft bell rings once. That's the signal to bring in the flour. You carry your bowl into the kitchen where Brother Cormac is sweating over a vat of something brown and lumpy. You hand him your offering. He grunts in approval. He says nothing else. He never does. You leave the kitchen, your hands dusted in flour, and wander toward the edge of the compound. Beyond the orchard wall, sheep graze lazily under the loose supervision of a novice monk with a staff and the attention span of a daisy. He waves when he sees you, then turns to scold a lamb chewing on his robe. You take a detour through the herb garden. There's sprigs of thyme, wild garlic, and wood sorrel grow in half-tended patches, mixing with runaway weeds, and something that might be fennel. You're not sure. You're careful not to pick anything without permission. The last time someone grabbed parsley without asking, the abbot gave a homily about theft that lasted 45 minutes and somehow involved St. Cuthbert's missing sandals. Back inside, you rinse your hands in the wash basin near the kitchen and return to your copying desk. More Latin, more letters that look like confused fish. The scent of oats follows you. You open your ink pot, dip the quill, and trace a line with care. It's hard to focus with your stomach doing slow backflips of anticipation. Supper's coming soon. You don't know what it'll be, but you're hoping for something solid. A whisper of wind pushes through the open archway. It carries the scent of wood smoke turnip and warm barley. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine what the kitchen looks like now. Steam rising, clay pots clanking, Brother Cormac muttering oaths in Old Irish as he fends off the fire with a stick. Then comes the sound, a quiet scrape thud, the signal that bowls are being set again. You clean your pen. You stretch your fingers. You rise. Back to the refectory. Same bench, same bowl, same spoon. This time the bread is different, still barley, but flatter, dusted with something that might be ash or just stubborn flour. You tear it carefully, examining the crumb like a scholar. It's dense. You approve. And in the bowl, yes, it's not porridge, it's stew. You suppress the urge to cheer. Thick root stew with chunks of something orange carrot, something beige turnip, and miracle of miracles, a faint hint of pepper. Someone must have raided the spice cabinet. You eat slowly, reverently, like it's communion. Around you, other monks do the same. No words, no glances, just spoons moving in slow unison, an orchestra of quiet chewing. You find a single split pea floating near the bottom of your bowl. You savor it. Across the room, Brother Fernand sneezes once and looks mortified. No one reacts. The reader recites a passage from Proverbs, something about wise men and patience. You spoon the last of the stew and bow your head not in prayer, but in satisfaction. You rise, you rinse, and, as the candlelight flickers across the stone, you feel it again, that soft, warm hum of having just enough. Not full, not hungry, just steady. You wake before the bell, the next day stirred not by sound, but by smell, something sharp and slightly smoky, wafting through the cracks in the stonework. Your stomach rouses before your feet do. You pull on your robe and step out into a sky painted with dawn pale pinks bleeding into soft grays. The monastery is quiet. The only movement is the ghost-like shuffle of Brother Lorcan gathering firewood in his arms. You follow your nose down the side path toward the kitchen. No talking, no greetings, just the subtle choreography of silent life. As you approach, a wave of savory warmth envelops you. Something's baking bread, maybe, but richer. You spot Brother Cormac stirring a wide clay pot with the usual level of intensity that suggests either culinary mastery or barely contained rage, probably both. You don't enter. Instead, you drift toward the refectory with the others. Today, you're on morning fire duty. That means maintaining the small hearth in the refectory during mealtime, ensuring the pot of tea stays hot, and if needed, carrying embers to relight the kitchen flame. It's a task given only to the moderately trusted and mostly coordinated. The room is dim when you enter, lit by a few low candles. A monk is already pouring water into the tea cauldron. It hisses quietly. You kneel beside the hearth and gently shift the coals, adding a thin branch and watching the flames catch. The warmth is subtle, creeping across the floorboards like a timid blessing. Then the bowls arrive. Today's breakfast more porridge, but with a twist apple mash. The apples must have come from the walled orchard. A mix of old and new, some tart enough to make your jaw twitch, others soft and sweet. You spoon the porridge and catch chunks of fruit stewed until they've melted into the oats. There's even a hint of spice. Clove. No. Maybe just very old wood from the stirring spoon. You eat slowly as always. The apple adds depth. Brother Fanon across the table raises his eyebrows slightly in a gesture that clearly means this is the best thing that's happened all week. You agree. The monk reading today has a nasal tone and speeds through the Latin a little too fast, but you appreciate the variation. Something about the story of Jonah, or maybe a parable. It doesn't matter. It washes over you like incense. As the bowls are cleared and the reader finishes, you tend the fire one last time and follow the others out into the growing light. Today's assignment: the silent signal for chores has indicated weeding. You head to the garden with a group of monks each carrying a woven basket. The soil is damp, spongy from the previous evening's mist. You kneel and begin pulling tiny green weeds from between rows of onions and bitter herbs. And while the work is simple, your mind is anything but idle. You begin to contemplate the rules around eating. It's not just when or what, but how. Historians agree that monastic eating was designed as a form of spiritual discipline. The silence was part reverence, part control. Eating too much, a sin. Complaining about a cold crust of barley bread, also a sin. Breaking the rhythm of shared stillness with a cough burp or poorly timed spoon scrape, perhaps not a sin, but definitely frowned upon. Even where you eat is coded. In the refectory, silence. In the kitchen, semi-silence with permission to grunt if something's on fire. Outside, during field meals, mild talking aloud, but only if the food is not currently in your mouth and the conversation pertains to crop saints or the weather. And heaven help you if you were caught snacking between meals. One monk centuries ago was said to have received 40 days of penance for nibbling cheese before Compline. Of course, as with any human system, the loopholes are legendary. Your favorite is the no speaking, but whistling isn't technically forbidden loophole. One novice once communicated an entire bread theft cover-up with 3 whistles and a kick under the table. You find a rhythm in your weeding. Pull, twist, shake, drop. The smell of the soil is rich and earthy. Worms retreat lazily from your fingers. A nearby monk uncovers a fat beet and holds it up like a trophy. You smile. It's probably going in tonight's stew. Around midday, someone brings out a cloth sack of barley cakes. You each get one, small, dense, and deeply dry, meant to last through labor. You chew yours slowly, letting the sun warm your back, and the faint scent of mint from the herb patch drift across your nose. You close your eyes. You don't need more than this. You finish your task, rise with your knees creaking, and return to the cloister where you rinse your hands and face. The stone basin is filled with rainwater, and the splash sends a shiver up your arms. Then, blessed bell, it's time to eat again. You return to the refectory and find your place. Today's meal is onion broth thickened with old bread and green flecks of something herbaceous, maybe thyme, maybe something stronger. The smell is glorious. The bread is oat-based this time, grainy, gritty, and slightly sweet. You break it with your hands and dip it into the broth, which clings to the crust like a warm memory. You chew slowly, not because you have to, but because you want to. The reader is slower today, more measured, a hymn maybe. You let the cadence lull you, while the steam from your bowl curls into your face. This meal feels heavier, not in your stomach, but in your chest. Satisfying, deep, grounding. You finish every drop. The bowls are cleared. The fire dims. You rise with the others and file back into the light. Outside, the sun has begun to dip low, casting long shadows on the gravel. You stop for a moment before your next duty and breathe in the smell of wood smoke earth and the faint tang of nettle tea wafting from the kitchen. You smile. Whatever's for supper, it doesn't need to be special. Just warm, just quiet, just shared. Your next task after the midday meal is a quiet one, minding the sheep as they graze just beyond the stone wall that rings the monastery. It's not exactly thrilling work, but it offers something you've come to appreciate more and more time to let your stomach settle and your mind meander. And really, isn't that the rhythm of life here? Eat humbly, work gently, reflect constantly. You collect a small satchel of breadcrumbs before you go, not for snacking, of course, but because Brother Cillian insists the sheep respond better when bribed. It's unclear whether he means spiritually or behaviorally. Either way, it gives you something to carry. You pass through the gate and into the meadow where the grass is tall, the sheep are indifferent, and the silence wraps around you like a second cloak. You find a flat rock and settle in. The sheep bleat. You crumble a bit of barley bread in your hand and toss it gently. One brave ewe approaches, then loses interest. Apparently her faith in your culinary offerings is limited. You watch the sheep graze for a while, then your eyes drift upward to the horizon. Rolling hills, wisps of smoke in the distance, perhaps from another cloister. The breeze carries a whiff of damp stone and sheep wool mingled with something earthy, maybe moss, maybe turnip. That's when you remember you forgot to return your spoon. Back in the monastery, every utensil has a place, a rhythm, a duty. Spoons are rinsed, dried, and slotted into the rack beneath the east arch. Forgetting one is not a crime, but it is a faux pas, one that might earn you a wordless eyebrow from Brother Ian. You resolve to sneak it back at dusk. While the sheep nibble grass and occasionally stare at you with mild judgment, your thoughts drift again, this time to the rules, specifically the rules of the table. Because although monks eat in silence, that doesn't mean they eat chaotically. There's an order, a structure, a strange, almost poetic system of who sits where, who serves first, and how food is distributed without a single word spoken. You've learned to read the signs. A hand gesture here, a tilt of the head there, a gentle nudge of a wooden bowl that says pass the butter or else. And of course, the universal sign for you, took my crust again, which is a very pointed sigh, accompanied by a long stare at the abbot's chair. Historians have puzzled over how such rigid structures developed in early Irish monastic life. Some suggest it was born out of necessity. So many brothers living under one roof required organization. Others think it was a reflection of deeper spiritual discipline, a way of humbling the body so the soul might rise. You just think someone was really tired of talking with their mouth full. Around mid-afternoon, you return the sheep, shake the grass from your robe, and sneak your spoon back into the rack without anyone noticing. Maybe. You make your way to the scriptorium for a short copying session. Today's task is copying a recipe, but not one you'd expect. It's a corrective brew for indigestion, equal parts fennel mint and a dash of ale warmed over embers. Mix until the scent is agreeable and drink while reciting Psalm 102. The monk next to you copies it like a sacred text. You do too, half curious, half hoping it'll show up in your cup after tonight's supper. The sun is low when the bell rings again. Back to the refectory. Supper tonight is root mash made of turnips, parsnips, and if your nose doesn't deceive you, a whisper of garlic. That last bit is notable. Garlic is not universally welcomed in the monastery. Some say it's too pungent. Others say it incites worldly thoughts. You're just glad something finally tastes alive. You spoon the mash carefully. It's soft, warm, and faintly spicy. The bread is rye this time, dense, dark, and crusted with oat dust. You tear it, dip it, chew. The reader tonight is new with a lilting cadence that makes even the driest passages sound like bedtime stories. You lose track of the words carried by rhythm and warmth. Someone sneezes. A spoon clinks. The fire cracks once. Otherwise, perfect stillness. Across the table, Brother Finan closes his eyes as he chews. Not from fatigue, but from reverence. You follow suit. The mash softens on your tongue. You don't rush it. Why would you? The food is plain, yes, but it's never served without purpose. Every bite is part of the monastic clock. Every spoonful a note in the day's prayer. You finish. You rinse. You step back into the crisp evening where the stars are just beginning to cut holes in the darkening sky. You pass by the herb garden again. The scent of crushed thyme rises under your boots. The wind carries the smell of the evening hearth peat smoke and bread crust. You pause before heading in. You're not full, but you're not hungry either. And somehow that feels like grace. You wake in the dark. Not twilight, not dawn. Just dark. The bell hasn't rung yet. No footsteps echo in the halls. No sheep bleating. No whisper of wind through the slats. Just a heavy silence, thick and absolute, broken only by the soft creak of wood as you sit up from your straw-stuffed mat. Today is a fast day. You remembered that last night, just before you drifted off when Brother Cormac muttered something about no cheese until Sunday while scrubbing a kettle. No cheese, no butter, no broth, no root mash, just bread, maybe. And if you're lucky, a warm cup of thin barley tea. But you already feel the hunger curling around your ribs like an old friend. It's not painful, not yet, but it's insistent. And it'll stay with you all day. You rise, wash your face in the icy basin, and dress. The sky is still a heavy slate, but there's a hint of blue to the east. A promise. You follow the familiar route through the cloister feet, silent on worn stone, your breath misting in the cold air. The other monks file out one by one, some bleary-eyed, some already wide awake in that eerie, monkish way. No one speaks. Even the birds seem to know not to interrupt. You enter the chapel for morning prayer. The scent of smoke and incense lingers faintly, like someone whispered warmth into the room, but forgot to stay. You take your place, bow your head, and begin the psalm. The rhythm anchors you. Even on an empty stomach, the words feel filling. After prayer, the monastery begins to stir. Chores are assigned by hand gesture and head tilt. You're sent to the garden, which is both a blessing and a curse. Fresh air, yes. But it's the kind of physical labor that makes your stomach remember it's got nothing to burn. Still, you go. The garden smells of damp earth and frost-bitten herbs. You kneel beside a row of stubborn turnips and begin to weed. The roots cling tight to the ground as if they too are fasting. You twist, pull, shake. Repeat. The cold seeps into your fingers. Your breath clouds. Somewhere behind you, Brother Fiatra is muttering a psalm under his breath as he digs. Time passes, and then a bell. You blink. Not the meal bell, a different tone, lower, more hollow. It's the signal for the half meal. You wipe your hands, rise slowly, and walk back to the refectory with the others. The silence feels heavier today, not because of strictness, but because of anticipation. A strange sort of hope that maybe, just maybe, the cook added something unexpected. A sprig of mint, a drop of oil. You know better. Still hope flickers. You sit in your usual spot. The bowl is smaller today, almost shallow. The spoon feels weightier by contrast. You peer inside. Bread soup, which is a generous term. It's really just hot water poured over crumbled barley bread. No herbs, no vegetables, just texture steam and silence. You sip. It tastes like regret, but warm regret. You chew slowly, letting each piece dissolve on your tongue. The bread is a few days old, tough, chewy, resilient like everything here. Historians still argue whether fasting in medieval Irish monasteries was more spiritual or logistical. Some suggest it was about discipline and humility. Others point out it was easier to fast when food was scarce and preservation unreliable. Perhaps it was both. A theology of necessity. Across the table, a monk taps gently on the wood. Not in irritation, but to remind you to slow down. You hadn't noticed. You were eating too quickly. You pause, nod, and resume at a more appropriate pace. Behind the reader, the fire crackles weakly. A single candle flickers in the corner. The reading today is from the Book of Job, which feels a little on the nose. Still, you listen. After the meal, which doesn't take long, you rinse your spoon and bowl and return to the fields. This time, you're helping gather nettles. Not the most pleasant task, but necessary. They'll be dried and brewed into tea or ground and mixed into stew on days when greens are scarce. You wear thick gloves and move slowly, carefully, plucking the tops and laying them in a shallow basket. The scent is sharp, medicinal, bitter. You wonder if your breath smells like barley and desperation. By noon, your stomach has settled into that quiet ache. Not quite pain, more like an echo. You distract yourself by organizing the herb shed, sorting dried mint from sage, and sneezing violently when a bag of crushed thyme bursts open in your face. Brother Cormac appears, sniffs, and walks away without comment. You take it as a compliment. Evening arrives gently. The wind has picked up, rustling the trees near the edge of the orchard. You return to the cloister, passing monks carrying buckets, baskets, and a slightly guilty-looking Brother Fintan with jam on his sleeve. You won't ask. Supper is the same as earlier breadwater, this time a bit cooler. There's an oatcake beside it. Thin, crisp, like biting into a stone coaster. You chew carefully and think fondly of yesterday's root mash. The reading is from A Saint's Life, a tale of someone who fasted for 40 days, saw angels, and still found time to build 3 churches. You are not that saint. You are just trying not to drop your spoon. After the final prayer, the monks file out into the night. The stars are out bright and cold and distant. You sit for a while in the cloister, sipping nettle tea that tastes like boiled grass and bitter good intentions. And despite the hunger, you feel light. Not weak, just unburdened. Tomorrow you'll eat better. Tonight you sleep with an empty belly and a quiet heart. And in this world, that's not a punishment. It's a kind of peace. The bell rings before dawn as always, but today there's a faint sense of excitement in the air. A murmur, almost though no voices rise. You feel it in the way Brother Fiatra moves faster down the hall, or how Brother Lorcan forgets to scowl at the crows gathered near the gate. Today is a feast day. No one says it out loud, but you know from the rhythm of the kitchen, the smoke rising earlier thicker, the clatter of iron pots, the scent heaven help you, the scent of roasting fish and fresh-cut herbs drifting through the stone walls before the sun has even breached the hills. You step outside with a renewed bounce in your step, your wool robe brushing lightly against the gravel path. The morning fog still clings low to the ground, wrapping the monastery in a kind of sleepy grace. The sheep are strangely silent. Even the crows seem impressed. You glance toward the bakehouse, and there it is, a small stack of turnips beside the door, recently scrubbed, neatly piled like they know they're about to be invited to dinner. The feast isn't grand by modern standards, no sugar, no spices from far-off lands, but by monastic terms, this is abundance. You make your way to the refectory for pre-dawn prayer stomach, already whispering its own petitions. The candles flicker as the monks chant softly, and you find yourself swaying to the rhythm. You're not sure if it's spiritual reverence or mild hypoglycemia. After prayer, you are miraculously not dismissed to the fields. You're directed to help prepare the feast. You head to the kitchen with 3 others. Inside, Brother Cormac is sweating profusely but smiling faintly, which is as close to joy as he gets. You're handed a dull knife and pointed toward a basket of spring greens, including dandelion watercress, and something you suspect is just decorative moss. You wash, chop, and mix them with barley crumbs and a bit of sour milk until they become a rough green mash. Someone passes you a trout, fresh, small, already cleaned its eyes, somehow still judging you. You help rub it with salt tuck in a sprig of lemon balm and lay it neatly onto a hot flat stone near the fire. The skin sizzles. Your mouth waters. One monk leans in and actually whispers that this fish came from the abbot's personal trap. A gift. You nod solemnly as if witnessing a relic. Historians often debate how luxurious monastic feasts really were. Some suggest they were full-on banquets complete with meat and mead. Others argue they were simply less austere versions of normal meals. In Ireland, evidence leans toward the latter: fresh fish, fresh bread, and just enough fat to remind you that joy exists. As the preparations continue, you help ladle thick root mash into wooden bowls, turnip carrot, and something orange. No one can identify, but all agree is delicious. You also slice barley loaves, this time coated in a thin glaze of buttermilk and roasted in the fire's edge until the crust crackles. You glance toward the back shelf and see it honey, a tiny clay pot nearly empty, guarded like a relic. A single drop will be added to the tea. You almost weep. At last, the second bell rings. You file into the refectory with the others. The room smells like heaven if heaven were a mix of grilled fish, roasted root vegetables, and toasted barley. You take your place. Same bowl, same spoon, different story. The reader's voice is clearer tonight, measured slow, gently rhythmic. He reads from the life of St. Bridget, describing miracles, fields of wheat, and a feast that fed 50 with a single loaf. You glance down at your meal. It's not miraculous, but it's pretty close. The fish flakes under your spoon. The skin is crisp. The greens are sharp, bitter, and alive. The bread is warm. You dip it into the turnip mash and chew slowly, reverently, as though it's the first solid food you've had in months. Across from you, Brother Fina mouths something that might be blessed be, though it could also be about time. You nod. You understand. Every bite feels like something earned. There's a moment halfway through the meal where the only sound is the rustle of sleeves and the quiet scraping of spoons against wooden bowls. It's not silence. It's shared peace. You finish the fish down to the tiniest flakes. The tea arrives, hot, green, faintly sweet. You detect mint, and yes, honey. Just a hint like a ghost passed through the kettle. The candlelight flickers in the oil-stained stone. The meal ends with a prayer not read, not sung, but simply sat in. No words, just warmth. You rise with the others, belly full for the first time all week, and file outside into the violet dusk. The sheep are already bedding down. A breeze stirs the herb patch. Somewhere an owl hoots once. You stand beneath the stars, your breath clouding in the cool air. You're not just satisfied, you're whole. You wake the next morning with something rare in your belly, lingering warmth. Not the warmth of broth or tea, but of fullness. Real fullness. The kind that lets you walk a little straighter, think a little clearer, and not fantasize about bread crusts mid-prayer. The feast has passed, but its memory lingers like a hymn echoing through stone. Your duties today are different. You're not heading to the fields or the garden. Instead, you've been assigned to a task both coveted and mildly feared. A la duty. You trudge to the monastery's low outbuilding where the brewing supplies are kept. The smell greets you first sharp, earthy, and sour like wet grain and hopeful yeast. It's not the intoxicating aroma of tavern ale, mind you. This is monastic brew, herbal, medicinal, and famously weak. Brother Aidan is waiting inside sleeves, already rolled arms dusted with flour and steam. He grins, which is mildly terrifying. He motions for you to help stir the mash, a thick mixture of soaked barley oat husks and hot water that's been left to steep overnight in a great wooden tub. The steam curls up into your face, warm and nutty, not unpleasant. You begin the stirring arms, moving in wide, slow circles. Around you are bundles of dried herbs, nettles, heather yarrow, wormwood, even a few twigs of juniper. None of them scream party, but they do offer something more important in monastic brewing purpose. Because in Irish monasteries, ale wasn't about joy or celebration. It was nourishment. It was safe water. It was even considered a form of medicine. And technically, it wasn't sinful, so long as you didn't get too enthusiastic about it. Historians still debate what too enthusiastic meant. Some argue monks got tipsy regularly. Others insist the alcohol content was so low you'd have to drink a gallon just to feel your knees. Either way, it was important enough to be brewed in every cloister. Brother Aidan hands you a clay jug and motions toward a sack of roasted barley. You scoop it in, watching the mash darken. Then comes the pouring, ladling the liquid into wide jars sealed with beeswax and straw. One will go to the abbot, one to the infirmary. The rest will be distributed quietly, reverently throughout the week. You taste a spoonful, warm, faintly sour, a little grassy. You pretend to enjoy it. Brother Aidan beams. Later that afternoon, you help carry the finished jugs into the refectory cellar. It's cooler there, lined with stone shelves and baskets of onions, apples, and root vegetables in various stages of ambition. You place the jars beside others already resting there, some labeled with faint marks, others not. You resist the urge to shake one. Before supper, you're sent to collect herbs for tea. The garden is quiet in the waning light. You kneel beside the mint and begin snipping 5 leaves at a time, careful not to overpluck. A breeze carries the scent of rosemary and damp earth. You think back to the brewing hall. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. Even the weakest brew had intention. When supper is served, you notice something surprising: ale on the table. Just a small cup per monk, passed silently and without ceremony. You sip. It's the same grassy, bitter taste from earlier, but it feels different now. Shared, blessed. In your bowl, barley stew. Again, humble. But tonight there's cheese crumbled on top. Not much. Just enough to remind you that the fast day is over. You don't even mind that the bread is yesterday's. You eat slowly. The ale warms your chest. The stew settles your thoughts. The monk reading tonight has a gravelly voice that turns every syllable into thunder. He's reading about St. Columba, his long walks, his silent meals, his habit of baking oatcakes in the shape of Celtic crosses. You glance at your own bread. No crosses here, but close enough. As the candles burn low, you feel the meal drawing to a close. The bowls are cleared. The reader pauses. The silence returns. It's a full silence now. Not empty, not lacking, but full like your belly, like the warm echo of herbs in your throat, like the shared stillness that makes a simple meal feel like a song. You help carry the leftover ale back to the kitchen. Brother Aidan nods at you once, as if to say, "Not bad for your first brew." You smile. Tomorrow the taste will fade. The hunger will return. But for now, you're fed, you're heard, and you've brewed something worth remembering. The rain starts just after midnight, soft at first like the sky clearing its throat. By morning, it's fully arrived, a steady curtain of gray, soaking the cloister paths dripping from the eaves, and turning the herb garden into a soggy stew of trampled mint and remorse. You pull your robe tighter as you make your way toward the kitchen hall where today's assignment awaits vegetable prep. And not the glamorous kind, not the seasoning, not the butter brushing. Today, it's turnip peeling. All of them. Brother Cormac greets you with a grunt and gestures to a crate the size of a horse. Inside turnips. Dozens of them. Cold, dirty, staring up at you like root-shaped judgments. You roll up your sleeves and get to work. The first turnip is stubborn, the second harder. By the fifth, your hands are numb and your patience is on spiritual trial. You scrape and twist slowly, building a mountain of pale yellow curls. Across the bench, Brother Tadag is doing the same, though somehow his pile of peels is 3 times larger. You suspect he's trained in some ancient turnip flaying technique lost to time. He smirks slightly. It's a silent challenge. You accept. The rhythm sets in scrape, toss, rotate. Occasionally, a particularly deformed turnip breaks the tempo, requiring more creative tactics. One shaped like a 3-legged dog defeats you entirely. You put it aside and pretend it never existed. Soon, the kitchen fills with the earthy scent of freshly peeled root vegetables and wet stone. Outside, the rain continues its steady percussion on the roof. You lose yourself in the repetition, letting your thoughts drift. You think about how many ways a turnip can be cooked, boiled, mashed, roasted, stewed. Sometimes it's sliced into thin wafers and baked into flat cakes over a hot stone. Occasionally, it's served raw, which feels less like a meal and more like a dare. Today, it'll go into pottage, a thick, hearty mix of whatever's available: barley, onions, herbs, and roots. No meat, of course, unless it's a high feast day, and even then fish is more likely. But pottage has its own kind of majesty. It's what you eat when you don't need to think, when chewing is more about breathing than tasting. Historians consider pottage the backbone of early medieval diets, simple, adaptable, endlessly variable. It's also a dish that spans every class. The poor had it daily, and even nobles slurped it between roast swan and spectacle. You finish the last turnip hands aching and toss the peels into the compost. Brother Cormac nods in approval and hands you a bowl of barley to soak. He doesn't say thank you. He doesn't need to. Later, you return to the refectory for the midday meal. You're exhausted from the sheer emotional toll of tuber management, and your body hums with that peculiar kind of hunger born from doing something deeply boring for too long. The bowl before you is filled with pottage, thick, steaming, and heavy. You recognize the barley, you soaked the turnips you peeled, and a few chunks of onion from yesterday's surplus basket. The bread is cracked, rye, sliced thin and slightly charred at the edges, perfect for dipping. You dip, you chew, and despite everything, it's good. The flavor is mellow with a hint of garlic that someone definitely wasn't supposed to use. You silently thank them for their courage. You glance across the table. Brother Finan dips his bread with exaggerated reverence. Brother Todd stares into his bowl like it's speaking to him. The reader recites a passage about humility, which feels appropriate for a room full of men eating beige mouche in silence. You take a second piece of bread. No one stops you. After the meal, you help carry the pots to the wash station. The hot water soothes your hands, still stiff from peeling. You catch your reflection in the water's surface just for a moment. Tired eyes, flower on your sleeve, parsnip root behind your ear. You rinse your face. You head back toward the garden rain, still falling in soft sheets. There's an odd joy in days like this, quiet, wet, repetitive. No drama, no epiphanies. Just the peace of doing one thing then another until the sun goes down and the soup runs out. At vespers, you kneel with the others. The chanting is low and steady. Your stomach is full. Your hands are clean. Your robe smells faintly of turnip and ash. You feel like a monk. Not just playing at it, but truly folded into the rhythm meal prayer work silence. You sleep well that night, lulled by the patter of rain, the softness of your mat, and the quiet triumph of turnips conquered. The morning bell arrives with a strange crispness in the air, a sure sign that the first frost of the season has crept in overnight. You swing your legs over the side of your cot and immediately regret it. The stone floor is cold enough to convince your toes they've been cursed. Still, you dress. You breathe into your hands, and you step outside into the pale light where the frost clings to every blade of grass, every wooden beam, even the rim of the old wash basin near the cloister well. Your breath fogs as you walk, and the scent of the monastery is different today. Sharper, cleaner, like the cold has scared the mustiness into hiding. You nod toward the sheep pen as you pass. The animals stare back, unimpressed, chewing icicles off the gateposts. Today you've been assigned to the river team. It's not glamorous, it involves buckets and eels. By the time you reach the river's edge, a short walk down a slippery trail worn by centuries of silent sandals, you're greeted by Brother Aiden already knee-deep in the shallows, his robe hitched up and his arms elbow-deep in a woven eel trap. He lifts it with a grunt. Inside, 4 fat eels all squirming like animated ropes. He grins. You do not. Still, you grab a bucket and get to work. The eels are slippery strong and surprisingly rude. One wraps around your forearm like a bracelet of protest. Another flings itself toward freedom and lands in the mud. You chase it. You fail. It stares at you. You stare back. Eventually, Brother Aiden rescues it with the flat side of a paddle. Once gathered, the eels are placed in a shallow holding basket weighted and returned to the cold water, where they'll stay until supper. You wonder if they know their fate. One of them appears to wink at you. You shake it off. Back at the monastery, the eels are cleaned with great care, their silvery skins peeled back like parchment, their meat sliced into strips and rubbed with salt and wild garlic. Brother Cormac then lays them in a stone oven to smoke slowly over peat embers, a process that smells both divine and mildly criminally. While the eels cook, your next task begins onion bread. You're handed a bowl of flour, a scoop of mashed onion, and a pinch of salt. You mix with cold hands until the dough feels like damp stone, then shape it into flat rounds and place them beside the eels to cook. The smell that rises from the oven is outrageous. You begin to salivate discreetly. Historians note that smoked eel was considered a delicacy in many medieval Irish monasteries, rich in protein, easy to preserve, and surprisingly tasty, especially when paired with onion bread, which helps mask any fishiness and adds welcome bulk to a monk's otherwise root-heavy diet. You pull the first loaf from the oven. It crackles softly in your hands, golden brown and steaming. You break it open and pass it to Brother Tadg, who's been peeling garlic with his eyes closed and humming a hymn under his breath. He nods in thanks and says nothing. Lunch is early today, a rare blessing. You take your usual place in the refectory. The reader begins a passage from Psalms, but your attention drifts immediately to the smoky bowl set before you. Inside, thin slices of eel, glistening and tender, nestled alongside steamed kale and a slab of the bread you baked just an hour ago. You take a bite. The eel is soft, salty, and just rich enough to feel indulgent. The bread is firm with a crisp crust and a caramelized edge where the onion has charred. It's the kind of meal that silences even the monks, who don't usually observe silence well. You dip the bread. You chew. You sit in stillness. Even Brother Finan, perpetual sire champion of dramatic spoon clinks, looks reverent today. And There's more. A pat of salted butter resting on a scrap of cabbage leaf beside your bowl. It glows like a sunrise. You hesitate only a moment before spreading it on the crust. It melts instantly. You take another bite. You smile. You may have eaten better in your pre-monastery life. You may have had stews thick with spiced meat, falling from the bone, sugar dusted on honeyed figs. But you've never eaten with this kind of clarity, where every flavor is present, every texture celebrated, every bite part of a rhythm shared across a dozen bowed heads. When the meal ends, you linger for just a second, your fingers tracing the edge of your empty bowl. The reader's voice fades, the candles gutter, and you feel for a moment like a man made entirely of salt smoke and warm bread. You rinse your bowl. You return your spoon. You step into the sun now higher, the frost beginning to retreat. Brother Aiden passes you on the path. He lifts his bucket. Inside more eels. You both nod. There will be stew tomorrow. You rise the next morning to the sound of mooing. Loud, persistent, vaguely accusatory mooing. You blink twice and sit up in your cot, unsure whether it's a dream or divine judgment. But no, it's real. It's echoing through the cloister, and from the pitch of it, someone has either forgotten to feed the cow or the cow has decided to file a formal complaint. You throw on your robe and shuffle outside, eyes bleary, only to find a cow standing in the cloister courtyard like it owns the place. Brother Lorcan is attempting to coax it back toward the animal enclosure with a handful of oats, in the kind of facial expression usually reserved for heretics. You step around the cow, offer it a polite nod, and continue on. Your task today is at the butter station, which is surprisingly not in the kitchen, but just off the cloister wall, where the stone stays cool year-round and the sun only peeks in around midday. It's a makeshift creamery, really wide wooden basins, thick cloths, clay pots sealed with wax. Brother Sinan is already there, sleeves rolled, pressing pats of butter into a carved wooden mold. He looks up, gestures for you to begin churning, and goes back to his pressing like a man on a mission. You sigh softly and take your place beside the churn barrel, a wide oak cylinder with a wooden dasher poking out of the top like an arrow begging for forgiveness. You wrap your hands around the handle, start the rhythm up, down, turn, lift, repeat, and try not to think about your arms. The cream inside sloshes. It resists. It sloshes more. This will take a while. Butter making in medieval Ireland was both common and revered. Monasteries depended on butter not just for food, but for preservation, for barter, even for lighting. Yes, you heard that right, butter candles. Probably not the most fragrant, but functional. After what feels like an entire liturgical season, the butter begins to thicken. You turn harder. Your arms protest. You keep going. Finally, Brother Sinan nods and gestures for the pouring cloth. You lift the churn, pour the yellow mass into the fine linen, and twist it slowly until the liquid whey drips free, leaving behind a rich, dense, pale golden butter. Sinan slices a tiny sample with a wooden spoon and tastes it. He nods once. You feel like you've passed a sacred trial. Then he whispers something you never thought you'd hear. Take a break. You nearly faint. You spend the rest of the morning organizing the butter cellar, lining up jars, checking seals, wiping drips. You find one that has clearly been opened and resealed with less care than is customary. There's a fingerprint in the top. You glance around. Suspicious. Monasteries were famously serious about butter theft. In some records, monks were assigned penance for sneaking butter from the kitchen stores. The rules might not say, "Thou shalt not spread unauthorized dairy," but the implication was clear. You make a note to ask Brother Finan about it. His toast always seems suspiciously glossy. At midday, the bell rings. You walk to the refectory with hands that still smell faintly of cream. It's not unpleasant. It's comforting, like warm milk at bedtime. Lunch today is barley cakes with smoked trout, and beside the bowl, there it is, a tiny pat of the very butter you helped churn, wrapped neatly in a strip of cabbage leaf. You feel oddly proud. You spread the butter gently across the warm barley, watching it melt into the crust. Then slowly, reverently, you take a bite. It's perfect, smooth, sharp, slightly sweet from the residual buttermilk. You chew slowly, letting the moment linger. Across the table, Brother Finan is eyeing your butter with curiosity. You give him a look. He looks away. The reader begins a story from the Desert Fathers monks who lived on less than this and claimed to see angels in the sand. You nod, chewing your buttery bread, and wonder if those angels ever tasted smoked trout with nettle butter. After the meal, you help clear the dishes. One bowl is suspiciously wiped clean. Another still has half a fish. You suspect someone is fasting, strategically saving up for tonight. You walk outside. The air has warmed slightly. The cow has been relocated. Peace has returned. You sit on the edge of the cloister wall, watching the mist roll over the fields. And for a moment, everything feels right. Simple. Silent. Enough. The first thing you notice this morning is the quiet. Not the usual cloistered silence, but a kind of hush that settles across the monastery like a soft blanket. Even the crows seem to have taken the day off. You rise slowly, stretch your arms beneath your robe, and step outside into a pale sky scattered with low drifting mist. You've been given a rare change of pace field meal duty. This means two things. One, you'll be carrying food out to the monks who are working beyond the monastery walls, tilling the outer fields and tending to the boundary fences. Two, you'll be allowed to eat outside, which means you can talk. Well, a little. Softly. Respectfully. Only if absolutely necessary. But compared to the usual sacred chewing silence, it's practically a festival. You help pack the basket in the kitchen, simple crusty rye bread wrapped in thick linen, 2 flasks of watered ale, a clay pot of lentil mash still warm from the fire, and because someone was feeling generous, a chunk of aged cheese that smells like it's been considering philosophy in a cellar for a decade. You carry the basket with Brother Dyer, who insists on walking barefoot as a form of penance. You do not question it. You simply admire the resilience of his feet and try not to slip on the dew-slick grass. The field lies about half a mile from the monastery, past a cluster of crumbling stone fences and a few wind-bent trees. The sky begins to brighten as you arrive, though the mist still clings stubbornly to the grass. You see them 3 monks stooped over rows of beans, and kale, their robes tucked up and hands dirt-caked. They straighten when you approach and offer the faintest of smiles. No words, just nods. You set out the food on a flat stone, and the 5 of you sit cross-legged around it. The cloth is spread, the bread is torn, the cheese is sniffed, inspected, and then eagerly accepted. And then you hear it a voice. Brother Kwan, the oldest among the workers, clears his throat and says quietly, "This is the good rye." You nearly drop your spoon. Conversation. Aloud. You glance at Brother Dyer. He offers a tiny shrug like a monkish version of a party hat. So you venture a response. "They baked it in the west oven. Better airflow." There's a pause. Then laughter, quiet, a puff of joy between bites. It's short-lived but precious. The lentil mash is peppery today. Someone definitely snuck in a pinch of mustard seed. The bread is sturdy chewy with a crust that resists in all the right ways. The cheese is bold. Too bold, perhaps. Brother Kwan makes a face like he's chewing a goat's philosophy thesis. You all laugh again, still gently, still reverently. As you eat, a crow lands nearby. Big, shiny, bold. It eyes your bread. You break off a crust and toss it gently toward the grass. The crow snatches it midair and hops a little closer. Brother Dare shakes his head. You've made a friend for life now. You nod. Or an enemy. Depends on tomorrow's bread. Historians often speculate on these rare, semi-permissible conversations. Field meals offered the only moments where monastic life softened around the edges. The rules bent, not broken like willow branches in wind. Here, with hands in dirt and sun on faces, the soul could exhale a little, and so could the mouth. The food is simple, the laughter brief, but the combination feels oddly luxurious. Eventually, the meal ends. The cloth is folded, the pot scraped clean. You refill the flask with cold water from a nearby stream where frogs chirp from the reeds like tiny monks rehearsing vespers. Before you leave, Brother Kwan hands you a small bunch of fresh mint. For the next tea, he says. You nod solemnly and tuck it into your satchel. On the walk back, Brother Dyer breaks the silence once more. You think we'll have that cheese again? You glance at him. Depends if it survives Brother Finan. You both share a chuckle. Back at the cloister, the quiet reasserts itself. You place the empty flask on the rack, the folded cloth in the wash basket. The mint goes to the kitchen, where Brother Cormac accepts it with a grunt of approval. That night at supper, the reader recites a passage on humility. You listen, hands folded, bowl steaming before you. You chew silently, but in your mind, you're back in the misty field, surrounded by rye-bread lentils and the crow, who may or may not now control your destiny. And you smile. The cellar is colder than you expect, not the crisp cold of morning air or the damp chill of mist. This is stone cold, the kind that creeps up your spine and settles behind your teeth. You blink as your eyes adjust to the low lamplight, the heavy air thick with the mingled scent of root vegetables, old wood, and secrets. Today your task is inventorying the cellar stores, which is monastic speak for sort the barrels and don't drop anything irreplaceable. Brother Cormac hands you a short checklist scratched on birch bark and a stub of charcoal. His instructions are clear. Check for mold, weigh the onions, and don't ask what's in the back left barrel. You nod and descend the stone steps. Your breath ghosts in front of you. The shelves are lined with barrels, baskets, sacks, and crocks, each carefully labeled in faint script. You begin with the obvious onions, dozens of them tangled in braided ropes, hanging like pungent chandeliers. You weigh them one rope at a time, marking your tally carefully. They clink like glass. Then apples stored in straw, their skin softening but still fragrant. You turn each one, gently checking for rot. Next come the beets tucked into clay jars, submerged in brine that smells like vinegar and ambition. You lift a lid and gag slightly. Brother Finan once said the beet pickling process was designed to remind us that joy must be earned. You believe him. You move deeper into the cellar. Here, the air is stiller, heavier. You reach the back corner, the forbidden zone. Curiosity is a sin, but also it's dark, and your lantern is swinging and your foot bumps something. You reach down and retrieve a jar, small, round, sealed in wax. No label. You hold it up to the light. Inside is a thick purple paste, shimmering slightly. You pop the seal. The smell is unmistakable figs. You stare. Figs don't grow anywhere near here. They're rare, imported, possibly contraband. Definitely not part of the rule. You put the lid back on and hide it behind a stack of turnips. You'll pretend you never saw it. Historians often speculate about these little indulgences, tiny luxuries tucked into monastic life, like pebbles in a sandal. Some claim monasteries were havens of strict austerity. Others argue that between the fasting and praying, monks occasionally indulged in imported jam. You're starting to believe the latter. You finish the inventory in silence, your fingers numb from cold, and your mind lingering on forbidden fruit. At midday, you return to the refectory. Lunch today is parsnip and barley stew, thick and plain, served with an oat loaf that leans heavily toward chewable stone. But it's warm, and filling, and dependable. You eat with your usual quiet rhythm, spoon to bowl to mouth bread, to broth repeat. You can't help but imagine how the stew would taste with just a touch of fig paste. The reader drones on about moral discipline. You try not to look guilty. After the meal, you're back in the cellar, this time with Brother Cillian, who hums as he lifts barrels and occasionally mutters comments like, "This one's heavier than Father Donal's sermons." You sort lentils, split peas, dried nettle, and bundles of dried kelp brought from the coast during the last bartering run. You carefully measure and reseal each item, then wipe down the shelves. At one point, Brother Cillian whispers, "Did you see the fig jar?" You freeze. No, you whisper back. He nods approvingly. You leave the cellar late in the day, your hands dusty, your robes smeared with beet juice, and your conscience somewhere between guilty and delighted. That evening at supper, the reader shares the story of a monk who found a hidden stash of dates and confessed immediately. You stare at your bowl. You do not confess, but you do vow to check the beet jars more often. Your meal is lentil mash, again this time flavored with a hint of horseradish. It burns slightly, but you welcome the heat. The bread is crumbly, but fresh. The tea, made from dried rose hips, is surprisingly sweet. You sip slowly, letting the warmth push away the cellar chill. After the dishes are cleared, you step outside. The stars are clear tonight, each one sharp white and distant. You sit by the cloister wall, watching your breath fade into the air. In your pocket is a tiny smear of charcoal, your last inventory note scrawled on the back of a birch leaf. You hold it up. It reads onions, beets, parsnips, figs. You smile. You'll leave it unconfirmed. Some mysteries are best left preserved like beets in brine tucked into shadow, quietly shimmering with secrets. The day begins not with a bell, but with a gesture. You're in the middle of prayer when Brother Malachi walks by, makes eye contact, and simply taps the tips of his fingers together twice. That's the signal. You're on recipe duty, not to write them down, not to read them aloud, but to learn one the quiet way. Passed from one monk to another in gestures, mimed measurements, knowing looks, and the occasional eyebrow that means, "That's too much salt, you absolute barbarian." You follow him to the side kitchen, a smaller room used for special tasks, preserves, tinctures, sauces, and on this rare occasion, the mustard blend. You've heard rumors that this particular mustard was created by a monk who'd once visited Gaul and returned forever, changed by their herbed vinegar, that only 3 brothers know the correct ratio, that once it was so good it caused a monk to speak mid-meal and be immediately reassigned to sheep duty for a week. Now it's your turn. Brother Malachi begins with a wide bowl into which he pours crushed mustard seed already ground. You mimic the motion, copying his pace. Then he lifts a jar of soured ale and trickles it in, watching the consistency with hawk-like intensity. You wait. He gestures a flat palm, followed by a short vertical flick. Stir gently. You obey. The aroma rises quickly, sharp, pungent, a little intoxicating. Then comes the vinegar infused with dried thyme and just a whisper of honey. He lets you stir. You add a pinch of salt and he smirks. Wrong pinch, he shows you again, fingers loose like flicking dust from a scroll. This continues for nearly an hour, no words, only rhythm. You strain the blend through a thin cloth, catching the solids and bottling the golden liquid into small corked jars. He labels them with a charcoal mark that looks like a half moon, then hands you one and points to your robe. You tuck it away, honored. Historians speak of medieval recipes as communal knowledge, rarely written down, passed from mouth to hand to heart. Especially in monasteries where knowledge was sacred, but speech was limited, recipes became dances, movements mimicked and refined, carried like prayers in muscle memory. Back in the main kitchen, Brother Cormac eyes your jar of mustard and nods in approval. He's seen the mark. He knows. You're not just a helper now. You're a custodian of flavor. That evening, the mustard is added to the meal, lentils and barley once again, but this time with a generous spoonful stirred in just before serving. The difference is astonishing. The bite, the brightness, it lifts the whole bowl. You sit straighter as you eat, watching the other monks react subtly. Brother Finan pauses, chews slowly, and closes his eyes. Brother Cillian raises an eyebrow. No one speaks, of course, but a dozen facial expressions silently declare, "This is not your average lentil mash." The reader tonight shares a tale from the life of St. Gall, who once made a miraculous stew that healed a bishop's gout. You can't help but wonder if mustard was involved. After supper, the jar is returned to the cool pantry. You carry it yourself, wrap it in cloth, and place it in the far right alcove, where special seasonings live beside the dried sage and a half-used pot of plum vinegar. As you turn to leave, Brother Malachi appears, says nothing, and simply taps his fingers again. You nod. You understand. You sleep well that night, dreaming of spices and silence, of passing knowledge through shadows, of lentils that actually make you smile. And when you wake, the mustard lingers faintly on your tongue. You know what day it is the moment you hear the bell's triple toll echo through the cloister, low, deliberate, and just a little slower than usual. It's not a feast day, not a fast day. It's Fish Friday, a weekly rhythm as predictable as dawn and as divisive as nettle tea. You shuffle into the kitchen and catch the first whiff of what's to come, salt seaweed, and a faint undercurrent of existential dread. Brother Cormac is already standing at the counter sleeves, rolled, holding up a particularly flat herring, like a man presenting incontrovertible proof that God has a sense of humor. You nod and head to your station. Fish Friday isn't just about serving fish. It's about preparing it, storing it, and most importantly, rotating the stock. Monastic fish preservation is a whole science, a delicate dance between salt barrels, pickling crocks, and drying racks. It's not uncommon to find a fish that predates your novitiate. You lift the lid on the first barrel. The smell hits you like a theological revelation. This one is ready, salty strong, and just starting to lose its structural confidence. You pluck out 3 herring, rinse them gently in vinegar, and pat them dry with rough linen. Then they're layered between slices of barley bread and wrapped in leaves for steaming. Elsewhere, Brother Todd is handling the pickled eels, muttering psalms under his breath like he's casting out spirits. Meanwhile, your job, aside from rotating the fish, is preparing the accompanying mash. Today, it's a turnip and oat blend spiced with mustard seed and thyme. A sturdy base for the fish. You stir it slowly over the fire, watching it bubble and thicken until it resembles something between porridge and wall plaster. By the time the midday bell rings, your arms are sore, your eyes are stinging, and your robe smells like smoked haddock. But you've done it. You've survived another Fish Friday prep. You take your seat in the refectory, same bench, same bowl. But today, the contents are bold. Atop the turnip mash sits a whole salted herring, slightly curled, still slightly smug. Beside it, a crust of brown bread, and yes, a dab of yesterday's mustard. A gift, a blessing, a way to survive what comes next. You take a bite. The herring is sharp, salty, and firm. The mash dulls the edges, grounding the flavor in something soft and familiar. Then comes the mustard, bright, spicy, and completely redemptive. Across the table, Brother Finan chews with quiet dignity. Brother Lorcan blinks twice in solemn approval. The reader recites from Ecclesiastes, "To everything there is a season." You nod internally, including fish. Historians have long marveled at the complexity of medieval monastic food cycles, especially how seasonal availability shaped what was eaten when and how much. Fish Fridays weren't just tradition, they were theology with fins. Abstinence from meat was about humility, simplicity, reconnecting the body with the rhythm of the earth. And sometimes, just sometimes, it was also about finding the good barrel. After the meal, you help scrub the fish boards and reset the drying rack. One unfortunate herring slides out of your grip and lands squarely on your sandal. You consider naming it, but instead just whisper a small apology and toss it back into the brine. That evening, the wind picks up. The scent of fish clings to the cloister walls, and the stars above feel sharper somehow. You sit by the gatehouse, sipping a small cup of warm seaweed broth, the official post-Fish Friday recovery tonic. It's savory, murky, and surprisingly soothing. You sip slowly, watching the clouds drift across the sky. You think back to your first Fish Friday. The panic, the salt, the mysterious third eyeball. Now it's routine, almost comforting. And as you drift off that night, you swear you hear the faintest sound outside your window. A soft splash, a gurgle, a vengeful eel perhaps. You smile in the dark. You'll deal with that tomorrow. The next morning begins not with bells or birdsong, but with the smell of garlic. You wake in confusion. Garlic here. Your robe is half on before the memory strikes Brother Theodoric has returned. The foreign monk from the continent, specifically Gaul, though he claims his great-uncle once saw Rome, is back for a seasonal visit. And if there is one thing he is famous or infamous for, it's this. He puts garlic in everything. You throw open your wooden shutter and confirm it. Yes, the kitchen is smoking, the air is buzzing, and Brother Cormac looks like he's already had several loud thoughts this morning. You make your way toward the kitchen cautiously. Last time Theodoric visited, he added garlic to the porridge. The result was divisive. Today's offense, garlic and leeks roasted together and mashed into a spreadable paste. Theodoric greets you warmly, clapping you on the back and offering you a wooden spoon. He gestures toward a loaf of spelt bread, motioning for you to try. You take a cautious bite. It's glorious, bold, savory, somehow soft and sharp, all at once. You chew in stunned silence. Brother Cormac glowers from the corner, muttering about unruly roots and foreign habits. You help prepare the rest-slicing radishes, mixing soft cheese with herbs, layering the garlic spread between toasted bread rounds and dried greens from the pantry. Theodoric hums as he works, tossing pinches of things into the pot with wild confidence and zero approval from the monastic hierarchy. Historians suggest that continental visitors often introduced new culinary techniques to insular monasteries. While Irish monks clung to austere simplicity, others arrived bearing recipes, spices, and bold flavor experiments. Garlic, in particular, was beloved in Gaulish monasteries but frowned upon here for its warming properties. Read it made monks talk too much. By midday, the refectory smells like a well-seasoned rebellion. You sit in your usual place, in your bowl leek and garlic mash served with a side of soft cheese and crusty bread. Beside it, a bitter ale meant to balance the heat, though it mostly tastes like boiled bark. The reader begins, but no one's listening. Everyone is chewing silently, thoughtfully, slowly. Even Brother Finan appears stunned. The garlic works. It's powerful, yes, it bites, but beneath it is something deeply nourishing, comforting, almost ancestral. You chew slowly, reverently. Brother Cillian clears his throat. Brother Lorcan wipes his brow. Someone somewhere exhales with conviction. After the meal, the kitchen is a quiet battlefield of opinions. Brother Cormac leans in and mutters, "One day he'll boil the abbot." Theodoric just smiles and starts drying spoons. That afternoon, you're sent to help in the garden, not your usual patch of cabbage and nettles, but the smaller corner. Theodoric insists on tending himself. It's overgrown, chaotic, full of foreign herbs no one else can name. He points to a tangled cluster of green with purple flowers. Time, he says, then rubs it between his fingers and holds it to your nose. It smells like strength. You spend the rest of the day gathering sprigs, trimming leaves, and trying to pronounce plant names you've never seen in the monastery's herbarium. You ask Theodoric where he learned so much. He only says when your bread is gray, your herbs must sing. You think about that all evening. At supper, the garlic is gone, but its memory lingers. The stew is mild again, familiar, oat thick, and onion sweet. But the bread still sings. Toasted, brushed with oil, topped with crushed herbs. You know whose doing that is. As the reader shares a tale of missionary monks who cross seas with only a book and a loaf of bread, you think maybe garlic is a kind of gospel. After the meal, you pass by the kitchen. Theodoric is sipping tea beside the fire. He raises his cup and says nothing. You nod. Tomorrow someone will hide the garlic. But tonight everyone sleeps warm. Today you're assigned to the scriptorium, and you know before stepping foot inside that you'll be spending most of your time removing crumbs from the margins of sacred texts. Not yours, of course. You're careful. But there's a certain monk, Brother Columban, whose idea of sacred silence includes sneaking oatcakes between verses of Isaiah. You sigh and push open the heavy door to the scriptorium. Inside it smells like ink, old vellum, and baked oats. The air is cool, the windows narrow slits that let in only slivers of gray light. You take your seat on a low stool, open your box of tools, quill knife sand, ink pot, and begin today's task illuminating the margin of a psalter. You're barely 3 letters in when you spot it, a crumb small but undeniable lodged in the crease near the edge. You lean closer. Oatcake definitely. Possibly 2 days old. Brother Columban walks past behind you, trying not to make eye contact. You flick the crumb out with your knife and get back to work. The scriptorium is silent except for the occasional rustle of parchment and the wet scratching of quills. But there's something comforting about this kind of work. Slow, precise, reverent. Like you're etching time itself into permanence. You glance down the row and spot another monk trying to smuggle in a dried fig wrapped in a bit of cloth. You raise an eyebrow. He blushes. You both return to your work without a word. Food in the scriptorium is strictly forbidden, of course, but also inevitable. Monks spend hours here, copying, illustrating, binding. Hunger creeps in. Boredom follows. And sometimes a psalm looks better when you're chewing. Historians note that margins of manuscripts from Irish monasteries often contain mysterious stains, dark smudges, tiny grease blots, the occasional fingerprint in butter. We now know these weren't accidents. They were snacks. Mid-morning, you're granted a short break. You step into the cloister walk and find Brother Finan seated on a bench, chewing slowly on what looks like yesterday's barley crust. He sees you. He lifts the crust in greeting. You sit beside him. He breaks off a piece and offers it to you. You take it, chew silently, and both stare into the distance where a rook lands heavily on the abbey wall and lets out a screech like a monk who just dropped an inkwell on a finished page. Back inside, you return to the Psalter. You decide to embellish the capital letter with a curling vine of barley and oat sheaves, a subtle tribute to the scriptorium's most frequent visitors' crumbs. By midday, the ink is beginning to fade on the page and in your mind. You close the book carefully, sand it, and set it aside. Lunch today is served slightly late. Your bowl contains pea and onion mash, creamy and mild, paired with a thick wedge of nut bread, likely made from the leftover barley flour and ground hazelnuts from Brother Dare's stash. You chew slowly. The peas are tender. The bread is heavy, dense, a challenge to teeth and patience alike. But the taste is sweet, earthy, and subtly rich. The reader recites a tale about St. Brendan's voyage where he subsisted on seaweed and fish for weeks, and claimed an angel disguised as a goose once gave him stew. You stare into your mash and try to imagine that goose. After the meal, you help clean the scriptorium shelves, collecting stray quills and wiping down wooden desks stained with centuries of ink. Beneath one cushion, you find a half-eaten oatcake wrapped in cloth. You sigh. You leave it there. Some things are sacred. That evening, as the lamps are lit and the sky turns lavender above the cloister wall, you sit with a few others by the herb garden. The scent of rosemary clings to the air. A small crumb of nut bread still lingers in your pocket. You nibble it quietly. Above you, the stars flicker into place, and for the first time all day, you hear someone laugh just once, just softly, when a rook tries to land on a butter churn and immediately slides off. You smile and think of margins of ink, of crumbs, and of how even the holiest pages contain smudges. Rain taps gently on the chapel roof this morning, a soothing rhythm like fingers on vellum. The air smells like whetstone and basil, and the sky has the soft gray color of an over-steeped cup of nettle tea. You're assigned to the infirmary kitchen, a quiet space off the cloister near the herb garden where today's task is simple, preparing medicinal teas for the ailing monks. The infirmary itself is a hush within a hush. Just 4 cots, 1 wooden chest, and a shelf lined with jars of dried herbs, their labels written in a Latin so crooked you suspect Brother Lorcan may have copied them while half asleep. Brother Eocade greets you with a nod, points to a mortar and pestle, and sets down 3 bundles dried peppermint crushed fennel seed and what looks suspiciously like powdered beetroot. You know what's coming. Today, you'll be making the tea. The tea that no one forgets. The one so potent it has at various times been called the cleanser, the purge, and once by Brother Finan, the great reckoning. You start grinding. Peppermint goes first, bright, sharp, invigorating. Fennel follows, adding a sweeter anise-like note. Then the beetroot, which stains everything it touches with an intensity usually reserved for acts of divine wrath. You mix the herbs into a linen bag and lower it into a clay pot of hot water, letting it steep until the smell makes your eyes water. You ladle it into 3 small cups each, resting on a folded scrap of linen, and deliver them to the infirmary. One monk receives his with a grateful nod. Another simply sighs and crosses himself. You suspect you'll be seeing them again soon, rushing past the chapel in search of solitude and speed. Historians have long noted the dual role of food and medicine in medieval monasteries. The line between them was thin. A broth could be supper or a cure. A tea could calm the soul or empty the stomach with remarkable urgency. You return to the kitchen to prepare a gentler brew, rosemary, chamomile, and dried apple. This one is for the abbot, who it turns out simply wants something warm that doesn't remind him of mortality. You sip some as you work. It's lovely, comforting, human. By midday, the rain has slowed. You're invited to dine in the infirmary as thanks for your service. The meal is small oat and leek mash, served with a wedge of soft cheese and a warm barley cake. The food here is blander, simpler, designed for healing, but it's no less nourishing. The reader, yes, even here, shares a brief tale of St. Kevin and his diet of moss berries and near-daily bee stings. You decide that oat mash isn't so bad after all. After the meal, you help tidy the shelves, refold bandages, and refill jars of thyme sage and valerian root. You find a note tucked inside one jar. For sleep, not prophecy. Use sparingly. No signature. That evening, back in the cloister, the world feels muted. The rain has stopped, but the stones are still wet. The sky is pale lavender. You sit on the low wall near the chapel holding the last of the chamomile tea. Brother Finan walks past slowly and mutters, "Never trust anything purple that smells like licorice." You nod, sipping anyway. The quiet deepens. The monastery exhales, and somewhere in a quiet cot, a monk swears loudly as the reckoning begins. You smile softly into your cup. You've done good work. Tomorrow will taste sweeter. Tonight's meal is different. Not in ingredients, those are familiar lentil stew, a piece of toasted spelt bread, and a small cup of mint tea, but in mood. You know something's coming. You can feel it in the way the brothers sit straighter, the way the bread is passed more carefully, the way even Brother Finan, usually a performance artist with his spoon, eats with silent reverence. Because tonight is the last full meal before the vigil fast. You'll eat nothing until the following evening. And even then, only after a full day of prayer meditation and enough kneeling to make your knees draft a letter of protest. So you eat slowly, savor every mouthful. The lentils are hearty soaked in ale broth spiced lightly with thyme and wild garlic. The bread is perfectly crisp, brushed with oil, and toasted until its edges singe ever so slightly. You dip, you chew. You listen to the reader tonight, a passage on endurance, on spiritual hunger, on learning to crave silence like bread. You understand that better now. After the meal, you're sent to help prepare the alms baskets, simple bundles of food, left at the monastery gate for any traveler or beggar in need. A loaf of barley bread, a wedge of hard cheese, a pinch of salt, and if supplies allow, a soft apple or two. You pack 6 of them by hand, wrapping each in coarse cloth and tying them with twine. No note, no preaching, just quiet generosity. As you work, you recall something Brother Cormac once said when he thought no one was listening. If your stew has flavor, feed someone. If it doesn't, feed them anyway. You leave the baskets at the gate as the stars emerge dim but clear, scattered like tiny oil lamps across the sky. And then it happens. You receive a loaf. From Brother Malachi, no explanation, no gesture, just a nod and a square of still warm barley bread wrapped in cloth and placed in your hands. You recognize the mark on the cloth, a tiny stitched cross. These loaves are given in quiet moments passed monk to monk, meant to be eaten when one most needs it, not necessarily when one is most hungry. You tuck it into your robe. You'll wait. You return to the cloister pass through the shadows of the stone hall and enter the scriptorium where the lamps still glow and the pages wait. Instead of copying tonight, you clean. You wipe the dust from the ledgers. You straighten the shelves. And in one of the older volumes tucked between a psalm and a recipe for boiled nettle, you find something strange. A folded slip of parchment barely longer than a finger, creased and faded. You open it slowly. Inside a drawing. A loaf of bread with steam curling above it, and below in the tiniest letters, "Share this." You fold it carefully and return it to the page. Later, just before Compline, you sit outside beneath the cloister archway. The wind is soft, the world is hushed. You unfold the cloth, lift the warm barley loaf, and break it in half. Moments later, Brother Finan appears beside you. He sits, says nothing. You pass him half. He takes it. You eat together in silence, and for the first time in all your meals, you understand this is communion, not in a grand cathedral, not on a feast day, not with incense or wine, but here at night, with a friend, under stars that don't demand your awe, only your presence. You finish the loaf, you brush the crumbs from your robe, you nod once, and then you rise ready to begin the long fast, not with hunger in your belly, but with bread in your memory. The morning of the vigil arrives quietly, as if it's afraid to wake you too suddenly. No bell rings. Instead, a single knock on your door, slow, solemn, and then gone. You rise, dress in the half-dark, and step into a world hushed even beyond its usual silences. The fog is thick, curling low across the stone paths, like it's hiding something ancient and gentle. Today you will not eat. You will listen, pray, labor, and wait. The hunger isn't immediate. It's just a polite emptiness at first, a subtle absence, like forgetting a name you almost remember. You join the others in the chapel, each monk wrapped tighter in his robe, each face turned just slightly inward. The prayers come in waves, psalms sung softly, chants rising and falling like breath. And time passes differently now. By mid-morning, you're scrubbing the stone floors of the refectory, ironic, given no food will be served there today. The act feels symbolic. You clean, not crumbs, but memory. Afterward, you're sent to the garden, not to weed or gather, just to tend. You rake the earth, rearrange stones, whisper thanks to sprouting kale and stubborn leeks. The wind stirs, gently scented faintly with rosemary and damp soil. Brother Lorcan passes you in silence and places something small in your palm. A nut, cracked, empty, just the shell. You look at him. He nods as if to say, that's the point. You understand. By midday, your belly starts to ache a little. Not pain, just insistence. Your hands work slower. Your thoughts drift more quickly. But no one complains. The day is not for comfort. It's for clearing, and as evening draws near, you sit with the others around the cloister. No fire, no food, just breath and memory and quiet fullness. Then when the sun is gone and the stars blink open, the bell rings once. Just once. Supper is served. Not stew, not bread, not ale, but a single warm cup of milk infused with mint and honey. You sip it slowly, carefully, like drinking from memory itself. It fills nothing but satisfies everything. You sleep that night, not fed but nourished, not full but whole, not heavy but held. Now as we ease into the quiet end of this journey, let yourself soften. Let the world you just visited of stone walls and barley bread of humble bowls and whispered laughter settle gently around you. You can still feel it, can't you? The flicker of oil lamps on vellum pages, the warm steam rising from oat mash, the silence broken only by a well-timed sigh or the soft click of a spoon on wood. Take one more breath. Feel how full the quiet is. These monks eating in silence weren't denying joy. They were learning to taste it more carefully, to chew slower, to notice the butter when it's there, and to miss it properly when it's not. You too can do that, even now, even here. So wherever you are, whether curled up under blankets or drifting in a quiet room, let your mind rest in that cloistered rhythm. No need to speak, no need to move, just breathe. And if a crumb lingers at the corner of your mouth, let it stay. That crumb is a memory, that crumb is a prayer. And you are full, even now, even in the quiet, especially in the quiet.